At 11:18 a.m., June 4, 1944, 30,000 feet over the Philippine Sea, Lieutenant William Harper heard a voice in his headset that should not have been possible. Bandits, 12 o'clock high, 3 miles, Vector 270. The words slid through a thin layer of radio static and settled into his ears with precise calm. Harper did not know the man who spoke. He could not see him. He could not even begin to imagine the face behind the voice. That man was not seated beside him. He was not flying in formation. He was not anywhere within sight of the open sky before Harper's canopy. He was somewhere behind him, buried inside a humming aircraft packed with glass screens and pulsing indicators, translating invisible signals into spoken geometry. Harper adjusted his oxygen mask with 2 fingers and felt the dampness along its edge. Moisture clung stubbornly to the rubber seal, fogging the corners of his vision. His breath sounded loud in his ears, rhythmic and hollow. Beneath him, the Hellcat's engine roared with steady mechanical certainty, its vibration traveling through the fuselage, into his boots, into his spine, into the thin aluminum of his seat. The canopy trembled faintly, blurred by a fine haze of condensation where the cold air touched warm glass. The water below was a dull sheet of steel blue, unbroken and endless. There were no silhouettes in the distance, no contrails, no movement. Only sky and breath and vibration, and a voice that did not belong to any man he could see. He rolled the aircraft gently to port, 7 degrees as instructed. The Hellcat responded without resistance. The engine pitch climbed as he eased the throttle forward. The voice remained steady, adjusting his course with the calm authority of someone who observed a battlefield that Harper could not. Maintain heading, climb slightly, target approaching. Harper obeyed without question. He had learned, in the quiet hours of training and in the sharp reality of combat, that the voice knew more than he did. It saw farther, it calculated faster, it existed beyond the limits of his canopy. The Zero never saw him coming. It rose out of the pale emptiness ahead like a ghost shape struggling to define itself, a dark blur becoming a wing, a fuselage, a spinning propeller. Harper did not bank into pursuit. He did not tighten his grip in panic. He followed instruction. Reduce angle. Fire when ready. His thumb depressed the trigger. The guns spoke in measured violence. Tracers carved clean lines through the sky, converging on the Japanese fighter's engine cowling. The Zero shuddered. A lick of flame surged across its right wing. Smoke burrowed backward into a twisting wake. Then the aircraft broke apart and fell, a dying machine tumbling toward the empty sea. Harper did not cheer. He did not speak. He simply awaited the next instruction. Another voice transmission followed, and then another. Climb, turn, descend, fire. Each command arrived before danger, before instinct, before fear. Each command positioned him exactly where the next enemy would appear, seconds before that enemy realized the trap had already closed. He never saw the man guiding him. The man guiding him never saw his face. Modern air combat had slipped beyond sight. 2 years earlier, this had not been war. It had been slaughter. In the early months of 1942, American pilots entered the Pacific sky with equipment already outdated against the Japanese A6M0. The Zero had introduced a level of dominance that stripped American fighters of choice. It outclimbed them. It outturned them. It rotated through its axis with lethal grace, bleeding minimal speed, maintaining control where American aircraft faltered. In visual combat, the Zero controlled time itself. The pattern repeated relentlessly. An American pilot spotted a Zero and attempted engagement. The Zero curved overhead, disappeared briefly into sun glare, then reappeared behind his tail with perfect precision. It took roughly 14 seconds for the Japanese pilot to settle into firing position, 14 seconds to pull the trigger, 14 seconds to end a life. There was no mystery. There was no adaptation, only repetition. The same spiral, the same silence, the same empty seat when the squadron returned. Pilots began speaking of the Zero not as an opponent but as a feature of the sky, something unavoidable, something that manifested and erased. The geometry of flight favored the machine, and the machine favored Japan. Then the voice arrived, not shouted, not dramatic, simply measured and present. It entered the cockpit as the sky itself shifted shape. Through a system known as SCR 522, American forces moved beyond visual dependence. Very high-frequency transmission pierced altitude, weather, and distance with remarkable stability. For the first time, a pilot's awareness extended beyond the physical arc of his eyes. Harper was no longer blind. He was connected. The unseen man behind the voice did not fight. He calculated. He interpreted the pulsing rhythm of radar returns and molded those signals into vectors precise enough to kill by geometry rather than instinct. Each instruction he gave intersected perfectly with the cold mathematics of aerial collision. The Japanese pilot never heard him, never imagined his existence, never grasped why the sky itself seemed to anticipate his every movement. The Zero pilot hunted by training. Harper hunted by instruction. Their philosophies shared nothing. Japanese doctrine enforced visual autonomy. Each pilot was an island of decision, responsible for interpreting threat and opportunity using personal skill. Silence within the cockpit meant discipline. Independence meant honor. American doctrine was collective and centralized. It treated the pilot not as a warrior acting alone, but as a component responding to higher coordination. The voice did not diminish him. It made him accurate. In this new structure, bravery mattered less than obedience. Reaction mattered less than anticipation. Harper did not need to search the sky. He waited, he listened, and he moved. Enemy fighters could not escape what they could not perceive. They flew into intersections defined long before their canopies aligned with the horizon. They died on paths already plotted by invisible mathematics. Modern air combat no longer began with sight. It began with instruction. The Hellcat's frame trembled as Harper completed another turn, aligning himself perfectly within prescribed space. His guns cooled slowly. The engine maintained its deliberate rhythm. The voice adjusted elevation. He thought briefly, not of the men he had just destroyed, but of the strange absence of contact. There was no chase, no struggle, no drawn-out spiral of fear, only a sequence of controlled moments, each defined before it occurred. Above, the sky remained empty. Below, the sea swallowed, wreckage without disturbance. Behind him, the unseen operator adjusted a dial and spoke again. The final Japanese fighter in Harper's assigned vector tried to evade, banking aggressively into a turn. But geometry had already closed. Harper fired once more. The machine burst. The battle dissolved back into silence. He never saw his guiding operator. The enemy never saw him. And in that quiet clarity lay the truth of the new battlefield. Combat no longer began with vision. It began with instruction. The sky above the Philippine Sea remained deceptively calm long after Harper's last burst of gunfire. No formation thundered across his vision. No silhouettes pressed toward him out of haze or glare. Only the haloed hum of his engine and the faint crackle of the radio filled the cockpit. He exhaled slowly, feeling the warm breath fog and recede along the edge of his oxygen mask. The voice did not congratulate him. It did not pause. It simply moved on. Hold altitude. Stand by for next. Vector. Harper leveled his wings and obeyed. What had just unfolded felt less like battle and more like execution, administered through mathematics. There had been no warning cry, no chaotic swirl, no close-range exchange of desperation and resolve. The Japanese pilots had died without understanding why the sky itself betrayed them. The air had become a realm that responded not to muscle memory or instinct, but to orders whispered through wire and vacuum tube. The Americans had not defeated the Zero in the air. They had removed it from relevance. Behind Harper, further than sight could reach, the radar aircraft continued its slow orbit. Inside its metal hull, an operator sat beneath low amber light, gaze fixed on oscillating lines and blinking echoes. Each faint return represented a living machine moving through space. His task was not heroism. it was precision. He interpreted these ghostly marks as if reading a language the enemy could not understand. He spoke into his transmitter. Harper moved. A zero died. The chain was flawless. This invisible coordination had not emerged from desperation alone. It had been cultivated deliberately, shaped by engineers and strategists who understood that air combat had reached a saturation point, where human perception could no longer equal mechanical speed. Propellers turned faster than sight. Distance collapsed faster than judgment. Reaction time ceased to matter when the enemy reached firing range within seconds. Control had to begin before contact. In earlier years, before such systems matured, pilots carried the weight of decision entirely on their shoulders. They flew blind into unknown sectors, scanning the horizon until silhouettes burst from sun glare or cloud shadow. By the time the threat was identified, engagement had already begun. Instinct ruled. Experience governed. Survival depended on proximity and luck. Now the sky itself directed motion. Harper recalled his first months in the Pacific Theater, when the Zero had struck like a phantom predator, leaving no time for thought. He remembered the chilled silence after roll calls, when names no longer answered. The hard stare of squadron mates who understood, without speaking, that each sortie might be final. He also remembered the moment the radio set had been installed beneath his instrument panel. The unfamiliar dials. The low hum when power surged through its circuits. The steady voice that first addressed him during a routine patrol. Adjust heading. Climb 200 feet. At the time, it felt surreal. Now, it felt necessary. Japanese pilots, by contrast, continued to rely upon a philosophy that demanded isolation. Each aircraft functioned as its own weapon. Each pilot fought by vision and reflex. There was pride in autonomy. There was honor in silence. But silence did not stop bullets. Their radios existed, but they were not integrated. Their transmissions barked sporadic instructions or warnings that arrived too late to matter. Their coordination dissolved with every high-speed maneuver. In moments of chaos, they reverted to independence. The American system did not allow isolation. It enforced connectivity. The Hellcat formation Harper flew with no longer resembled separate machines. It moved as a responsive unit, adjusting and reforming as commands arrived. Each man trusted the voice. Each understood that disobedience meant statistical vulnerability. And in this trust, survival increased dramatically. The radio not only guided attack, it preserved spacing. It managed collision risk. It orchestrated altitude levels across an invisible lattice where intersecting paths would otherwise become lethal confusion. It positioned American aircraft in overlap zones that eliminated blind spots and trap angles. By the time Japanese fighters entered visual range, their own strategies had already failed. Harper caught a brief glimpse of another Hellcat sweeping past, its wings rocking slightly as a silent acknowledgement. He recognized no face behind the mask. He did not need to. The connection was not between men, it was between signals. Another directive reached his ears. Enemy group bearing 190. Maintain readiness. His hand tightened slightly around the control stick. The engine response remained smooth. The metal frame vibrated with restrained power. He knew there would be more. The battle was not finished. The Japanese would return, driven by discipline and courage that no technology could erase. But courage could not compensate for placement. And placement was now dictated by voices none of them could challenge. Far below, the ocean swallowed debris without pause. Above, contrails traced lines that represented not movement but decisions executed seconds before the moment of impact. The sky was no longer open territory. It was structured. Harper realized that the Zero's greatest advantage had never been agility alone. It had been expectation. For 2 years, American pilots had believed dogfighting was the natural language of aerial dominance. The Zero thrived within that framework. Now the language had changed. The enemy continued to speak in turns and climbs. America responded in vectors and coordination. Harper listened again. Stand by, Maintain formation. He leveled his aircraft and waited, the canopy reflecting pale streaks of sun as the Hellcat cut effortlessly through thin air. The radio whispered faint static, a reminder that war no longer roared. It instructed. In the distance, 3 small shapes materialized, just perceptible against the washed blue horizon. Harper did not maneuver. He did not react. He listened. The unseen voice began another sequence of calculations. Lines of geometry formed in silence. Threat intersected with prediction. And once more, the reality of air combat advanced not toward sight, but toward instruction. The sky did not belong to whoever turned fastest, it belonged to whomever listened first. The distant shapes resolved into Japanese fighters long before they realized they had been seen. Small predatory silhouettes, dark against the bleached sky, carrying with them the silent assumption that visual supremacy still governed the air. They approached in disciplined spacing, wings level, altitude stable. To them, the sky remained as it had always been, a realm judged by eyesight, distance, timing, and reflex. They could not hear the voice that had already measured them. Adjust heading, descend 300 feet, prepare to engage. Harper responded without hesitation. The Hellcat dipped gently, nose dropping by a measured degree, aligning his flight path with vectors drawn far behind the scene of combat. He could feel the slight shift in pressure through the airframe, a subtle change in vibration as throttle compensation adjusted engine load. The commander of his movement sat nowhere in his field of view, yet his presence governed every inch of Harper's trajectory. This was not pursuit, this was positioning. The Japanese formation widened slightly, anticipating a traditional engagement. They expected what had always occurred: sight, maneuver, convergence, risk. That expectation had become habit. That habit now guided them toward destruction. Harper's radio crackled with low static as the voice updated his path. Hold steady. Target approaching effective range. The Hellcat surged forward along its invisible rail, each meter of airspace pre-selected by someone who understood the battlefield beyond the limits of human vision. Harper watched the leading Zero shift slightly, its pilot adjusting pitch, scanning for threat. He did not yet see Harper. He did not see what placed Harper there. At the airborne control aircraft, the radar operator followed the faint circular glow of the returning signal. To him, the enemy was not metal and cloth and fire. It was geometry. It was motion measured in angles, speeds, and convergence points. He spoke again, his voice devoid of emphasis. Fire. Harper squeezed the trigger. Tracers stitched the air into prescribed intersections. The Zero's starboard wing caught flame instantly. The fuselage twisted, nose dropping, tail lifting slightly before it began to spiral downward. The remaining Japanese aircraft scattered, breaking formation manually, reacting to phenomena their doctrine had not prepared them to interpret. They were already lost, though they did not yet understand it. The moment passed, and once more the air returned to its false quiet. The transformation of combat Harper now experienced was not a single innovation. It was the result of layered doctrine, repeated rehearsal, and deliberate structural change. Somewhere far from this sky, men in ground stations and carrier decks refined these procedures through calculation, diagrams, and relentless iteration. Every successful intercept fed more data into the system. Every engagement made the next one more precise. This coordination did not live in data, Harper's muscles. It lived in policy, circuitry, and training. Traditional pilot instinct, once revered as the heart of survival, was becoming obsolete. The reflex to bank sharply, to pursue impulsively, to chase the tail of a fast-moving silhouette was now liability. Speed had exceeded intuition. Space had outgrown perception. Modern air war demanded a different discipline, the willingness to wait, to listen, to move only when directed. Harper remembered instructors speaking of these changes with unusual restraint. They had not called it superiority. They had not called it revolution. They had simply pointed to diagrams and said, "This is how survival now functions." His earliest missions had been guided by the thrill of engagement and the terror of unpredictability. Every encounter had been personal, chaotic, intimate. He had once seen whites of enemy eyes through canopy glass. Now his opponents rarely made it close enough for expression. The battlefield had lost its face. Japanese pilots continued to fight with bravery. They pressed forward despite rising loss rates, despite formations dissolving under unseen attack. They still trusted the physical relationship between aircraft, the language of banking and dive and arc. They still believed the sky yielded to maneuver. But maneuver now obeyed voice. Harper noted the slight warmth in his left glove as sunlight filtered briefly across the canopy frame. He felt his own heartbeat within the rigid rhythm of the cockpit, steady but alert. His eyes remained forward. His ears awaited instruction. New contact, bearing 155, distance 4 miles. He adjusted again, altering descent with learned trust. Each command refined his angle. Each directive reduced uncertainty. The Hellcat ceased to be a fighter navigating hostile airspace and became a projectile guided through invisible corridors of calculation. The philosophical rupture could not be overstated. For decades, air combat had elevated the individual, pilot's judgment as the final arbiter of life. Now judgment migrated outward, transferred to collective intelligence housed in unseen machinery. The Japanese clung to the romanticized notion of singular skill. The Americans embraced the impersonal efficiency of shared sight. Harper understood neither ideology fully. He only understood that he survived. He wondered briefly what the Japanese pilots saw as they maneuvered. Did they recognize the pattern forming around them? Did they question why attack came from unexpected angles? Why American fighters emerged from empty sky? Or did instinct override comprehension until the final instant? He did not pity them. He did not hate them. He simply recognized that they fought by rules no longer valid. The radio reminded him again. Maintain altitude. Await further instruction. He complied. In the broader structure of this battle, he was not an elite hero carving his name across the sky. He was a receiver of instructions participating in a machine that extended from deck crews to radar stations, from ship captains to signal operators. And within that machine, his survival was mathematical rather than emotional. The Hellcat glided into new position, contrails threading faint lines behind it. He checked his instruments. All stable. Fuel sufficient. Pressure readings correct. Another fleeting glimpse of enemy aircraft flashed across the edge of the horizon. He did not move. The voice would decide when movement mattered. And when that moment came, the sky would once again prove that agility had surrendered to coordination and instinct had been replaced by precision. The age of solitary dogfighting was fading. The age of invisible instruction had arrived. The voice remained low, even, procedural. No urgency, no inflection. It carried the weight of unseen authority and the certainty of calculation. Turn 2 degrees starboard, maintain speed. Stand by. Harper obeyed without thought. The Hellcat responded as if, anticipating the instruction. Wing angle adjusted slightly. Airflow shifted across the fuselage. The engine's pulse remained constant. Around him stretched a sky that no longer belonged to the pilot who flew within it. He was operating inside a geometry he did not draw. Far from Harper's cockpit, beneath the steel decks of American carriers and within windowless compartments on distant islands, analysts tracked movement on glowing screens. Each aircraft appeared as a moving point of light. Each course change recorded. Each altitude adjustment translated into silent data. They spoke in bearings and distances as calmly as navigators plotting a survey. They saw the enemy before the enemy knew he existed. This extended awareness functioned only because every component obeyed the same structure. Radar arrays, scanning wide arcs. Signal officers confirming transmission clarity. Controllers synchronizing flight paths across squadrons, separated by miles of open ocean. The system operated, without pause. It did not sleep. It did not panic. It simply calculated. Harper's presence in the air was merely one node in a circuit that stretched from ship hull to stratosphere. In previous years, his trajectory would have been shaped by visual instinct. He would have searched for silhouettes rising out of cloud cover, gauged speed by intuition, engaged by proximity. Now he waited for direction delivered with mathematical certainty. The difference was unmistakable. There was no thrill of desperate improvisation, only precise compliance. Target bearing adjusted, distance decreasing, maintain heading. He saw a faint shape forming ahead, its outline blurred by distance. The Japanese pilot inside believed himself unobserved. The shape drifted closer, unaware it had already been assigned probability of destruction. The radar operator's voice cut again. "Fire when ready." Harper did not hesitate. His fingers responded with mechanical discipline. The Hellcat's guns released controlled bursts. The tracers arced with calculated convergence. The Zero shuddered. A plume of smoke spread along its fuselage. The aircraft tilted sharply, spiraling into absence. Another silent disappearance. This was not dominance through superiority of aircraft, it was dominance through orchestration. He thought briefly of earlier pilots who had died in chaotic circles of close combat, who had turned tightly until structural limits tore airframes apart, who had chased tails until cannon fire ended motion. Their deaths had been unpredictable, almost personal. His own engagements now occurred at prescribed distances, guided by faceless voices that calculated outcomes minutes before they occurred. The war had shifted from confrontation to intervention. Japanese doctrine did not acknowledge such intervention. Their aircraft formations still favored visual spacing, their tactics built around individual maneuver. They trusted intuition cultivated through repeated training, through years of discipline and close observation. They had no concept of unseen positioning beyond their view. What they could not see was swallowing them. Harper's headset delivered new directives. Multiple returns. Adjust altitude down 500 feet. Prepare for intercept. He complied, descending in a smooth, controlled arc. Below, waves reflected pale ribbons of light. Above, contrails from distant aircraft traced faint scars through the atmosphere. Somewhere ahead, Japanese pilots were narrowing focus, scanning for movement that had already passed above their field of vision. The silence between commands extended for seconds that seemed longer than appropriate. During those intervals, Harper studied his instruments, his fuel gauge, the minor tremor of his left wing. Everything remained deliberate, everything aligned with instruction. He wondered about the man behind the voice, the operator he would never meet. The technician leaning over illuminated screens that dictated orientation and survival. He imagined the operator seated in a cramped aircraft compartment, headphones tight against skull, eyes monitoring faint green arcs. They were connected by copper wire and vacuum tubes more securely than brothers. They fought separate battles in unison. Harper felt no resentment toward this loss of individual command. If anything, he recognized its necessity. The system did not replace him. It completed him. Without his discipline, the voice meant nothing. Without the voice, his skill now lacked relevance. The modern pilot obeyed. A final transmission came through his headset. Return vector. Area secured. His hands relaxed slightly on the control stick. The Hellcat shifted toward prescribed coordinates. The fractured remains of enemy formations scattered far behind him. The sea swallowed evidence with impartial efficiency. He climbed toward regroup altitude, maintaining exact heading. Around him, other American fighters aligned silently into formation, each synchronized through invisible instruction. They did not exchange acknowledgments. They did not congratulate survival. They simply resumed their positions within the greater structure. He understood now that victory no longer arrived through personal heroism alone. It arrived through invisible coordination, through voices and numbers and unseen networks that turned contested sky into calculated environment. The sky had transformed into charted territory. Somewhere ahead, fresh directives would arrive. New bearings, new distances, new instructions eliminating the need for instinct. The pattern would repeat until opposition dissolved entirely. Harper's role would remain unchanged. He would listen. He would turn. He would fire. He would survive. And the enemy would remain bound to a way of fighting that no longer governed the modern air. The Japanese pilot believed he was alone. His Zero sliced through the air with accustomed grace, its light frame responding precisely to every correction. The canopy curved smoothly around his line of sight. His hands moved with trained familiarity, adjusting throttle, trimming for speed, watching the horizon for any sign of intrusion. His doctrine had taught him that mastery resided in vision and balance. He had been conditioned to trust his eyes above all else. There was nothing in his field of view, no contrail, no glint of reflected sun, no silhouette of threat. He could not comprehend that his flight had been plotted minutes earlier by officers he would never see. His altitude recorded, his vector calculated, his destruction anticipated by operators situated beyond the edges of his world. His aircraft remained flawless. His awareness failed. By 1944, the divide between these two ways of war had grown absolute. Japan remained committed to a philosophy that concluded combat should occur between pilots, skill against skill, judgment against judgment. Their training emphasized autonomy. Each aviator was expected to think independently, engage decisively, and accept the burden of outcome without external interference. Silence signified focus. Voice communication was reserved for necessity rather than integration. American doctrine had inverted that assumption entirely. The pilot no longer fought alone. He participated in a system that extended beyond individual perception. He became one element in a guided structure, obeying instructions shaped by resources he did not touch and knowledge he could not personally gather. His role was no longer to see, it was to execute. Harper recognized this distinction not through theory, but through direct experience. Every engagement reinforced it. When his radio spoke, his confidence did not derive from instinct. It derived from the certainty that others were observing risks his own eyes could not capture. He had flown before the shift. He remembered missions where empty sky offered no guidance, where distant shadows demanded interpretation, where every turn carried uncertainty. Those moments now felt primitive, almost irresponsible. The absence of command had been romanticized as independence. In reality, it had been exposure. Around him, American formations adhered to this new rhythm. Instructions flowed steadily, altering direction, spacing, altitude, speed. Each shift coordinated across distances impossible to manage through visual signals alone. Entire squadrons realigned through quiet transmissions, their patterns forming precise geometry, invisible from within its center. Far below, the carrier group held steady course. Deck officers arranged incoming aircraft with mechanical precision. Communications flowed seamlessly from ship to sky. The relationship no longer relied on improvisation. It functioned as calculated choreography. It required infrastructure. Massive radar arrays rotated purposefully across horizon lines. Control rooms mapped arcs and intersecting bearings. Technicians monitored voltage, frequency, signal clarity. Shift supervisors rotated positions to maintain unbroken awareness through night and weather. Every element contributed to a structure beyond individual heroism. Japan could not replicate this. Their industry lacked uniform manufacturing precision. Materials remained scarce. Copper supplies dwindled. Quartz crystals needed for stable frequency output remained insufficient. Skilled technicians were limited. Training doctrine resisted centralized direction. Their system fractured because it had never been designed to unify. They could build aircraft. They could train pilots. They could not build orchestration. A Japanese squadron once launched, confident that superior machines and elite discipline guaranteed dominance. Now that same squadron navigated a battlefield shaped by audible instruction, directed by unseen operators who catalogued their movement from over the curve of the earth. Harper returned toward regroup zone, guided quietly by the voice that never revealed its origin. He aligned his aircraft according to transmitted orientation. Other Hellcats slid into formation around him, each synchronized without acknowledgement. There was no visible enemy, no pursuit, only controlled silence. The transformation had occurred so thoroughly that even survival felt procedural. Flight had become execution of command. Victory had become completion of directive. Through this system, American losses diminished, engagements shortened, ratio of destruction shifted. Where combat once demanded prolonged maneuver, it now resolved swiftly, before presence registered in enemy consciousness. Japanese pilots noticed the shift, but misinterpreted its source. They blamed pilot aggression, mechanical improvements, coincidence. They struggled to identify the invisible force altering outcome. Their after-action reports described invisible attackers and impossible interception timing. The reality remained beyond language, grounded in visual explanation. For Harper, explanation felt unnecessary. He needed no theory, no historical premise. He existed within effect. As the ocean spread endlessly below him and faint radio static filled his ears, he recognized that the war he now fought bore no resemblance to the one that had claimed so many lives just years earlier. The enemy remained skilled. Their machines remained capable. Their courage remained undeniable. But courage had lost its privilege. In this new airspace, honor yielded to calculation. Valor yielded to foundation. Man yielded to system. And those who could not adapt found themselves flying blind, searching a sky that no longer functioned according to familiar law. Harper steadied his aircraft and listened. The next instruction would arrive soon. The next instruction did arrive. It came as quietly as every command before it, a voice calibrated for clarity over comfort, stripped of unnecessary syllables. Precision defined authority. New contact group detected. Bearing 310. Range 23 miles. Altitude increasing. Prepare intercept. Harper repeated nothing aloud. He did not question calculation. He turned the Hellcat as directed, felt the structure shift beneath him, and watched the horizon narrow in accordance with invisible prediction. Somewhere, beyond distance his own eyesight could not reach, a Japanese formation was advancing with discipline and anticipation that no longer held relevance. He flew forward with untroubled certainty. Controllers aboard the carrier had already plotted every possible trajectory. They knew speed, they knew climb rate, they knew course adjustment patterns. They had studied prior encounters with the same enemy unit. They had charted environmental interference, cloud density, wind velocity. Harper existed as endpoint, not initiator. The voice continued. Climb 400 feet, maintain vector. Through steady ascent, the aircraft gained altitude gradually, not through instinctive responsiveness, but structured positioning. The system dictated position as surely as gravity dictated descent. This was no longer warfare governed by reaction. It was warfare defined by anticipation. As he approached curved contrails high above, Harper recognized the structural difference fully. The Japanese still searched for adversary with eyes and judgment. Their pilots relied on spatial memory and line-of-sight calculation developed through repetition and instinct. They learned to feel the air beneath wings, to sense subtle resistance. Their training refined individual skill to its sharpest form. Yet skill now intersected with science. American pilots anticipated collision points, not through vision, but through invisible coordination from observers with vision beyond the horizon. What had once been chance meeting now occurred within designed convergence. Harper felt no anxiety. There was no thrill, only alignment. The faint silhouettes soon emerged from cloud cover, dark specks moving across pale upper sky. They held formation, unaware of precise geometry surrounding them. They did not adjust trajectory. They did not scatter. Their discipline remained rigid, predictable, reliable. The voice spoke again. Adjust yaw. Decrease speed 10 knots. Stand by for firing clearance. Harper performed controlled deceleration, maintaining stability. The Hellcat settled perfectly into optimal firing approach. The Japanese pilots still did not see him. Their focus remained elsewhere. One of them turned his head slightly, scanning right horizon. The movement almost suggested curiosity. It revealed nothing. He did not comprehend that every movement of his formation had already been tracked from beyond visible space. A small tremor passed through Harper's aircraft as the engine settled into steady vibration. His hands remained firm on the control stick. His focus sharpened. Fire when ready. He opened controlled bursts. The cannons responded with mechanical certainty. Tracer paths intersected, along predicted convergence point. The leading Zero shuddered violently. Its wingtip fractured. A plume of black smoke stained the sky. The pilot ejected no resistance. The body could not respond before gravity reclaimed mass. Another followed. The formation fragmented abruptly, but not through surprise. Through structural disruption. The Japanese pilots attempted defensive maneuvering instinctively, but their movements had already been accounted for. The system compensated dynamically, shifting Harper's position accordingly. Secondary vector adjustment. Continue pursuit. He obeyed without hesitation. The need to identify targets visually no longer existed. Sound-directed orientation. Geometry-informed approach. Violence concluded without personalization. This was not a duel. It was execution of spatial mathematics. In years past, aerial combat entailed spirals and tail chases. Shootouts lasted minutes, sometimes longer. Pilots engaged within dangerous proximity, each depending solely on personal reaction. Victories were immediate and individual. Now they occurred through methodology. Japanese squadrons attempting retaliation found themselves disoriented by invisible placement of American fighters. Defensive maneuvers failed because threats emerged before visual confirmation. Traditional reflexes betrayed them. They faced foes not limited by direct sight. One surviving pilot later described the engagement as being attacked by the horizon itself. He could not map threat presence. He could not anticipate arrival. His training provided no counter to unseen mapping. Harper witnessed no panic, only dissolution. The second Japanese aircraft spiraled downward, tearing through air with audible shriek. Below, ocean foam expanded outward where metal struck violently. The remaining formations scattered toward west vector, abandoning intent. The voice remained unaffected. Threat neutralized, reacquire altitude, return vector scheduled. With compliance, Harper stabilized course, maintaining designated altitude. The battlefield once again faded into calm. Smoke plumes dissipated beneath distant horizon. The violence ceased as abruptly as it formed. He did not celebrate. He did not speak. He merely continued flight. This absence of emotion accompanied modern warfare. Battles resolved without recognition of adversary identity, without physical proximity, without acknowledgement of individual struggle. Men fought without seeing those they killed. Others died without witnessing the source. The war existed as process. Behind Harper, far below, shipborne radar arrays rotated continuously. Officers marked new targets on illuminated grids. Data traveled swiftly through cables and transmitters. Controllers executed layered commands with mechanical focus. Each movement mattered. None saw Harper directly. He was not hero. He was instrument. The Japanese pilot's sacrifice, though brave and disciplined, could not compete with invisible supervision that calculated death before its arrival. The absence of recognition did not diminish the violence. It redefined it. Harper considered his situation briefly as his aircraft resumed position among other Hellcats. He occupied exact spatial coordinates designated by the voice. Around him, formation balance remained flawless. This new form of conflict offered no speech, no charge, no personal revenge. It offered no gallantry, only controlled elimination. He realized that the air itself had transformed. Previously open and uncertain, now structured and predictive. Every mile of empty sky had become potential grid. Every altitude belonged to invisible governance. Every movement intersected with unseen instruction. It no longer mattered what a pilot desired. It mattered what the system calculated. Harper flew onward in silence, enveloped within operational control that superseded personal will. His role remained finite. Instructions would continue. His engagement would comply. Aircraft would be destroyed. The war would proceed unseen, guided by those who viewed it through instruments rather than eyes. Combat now occurred before contact. Decisions arrived before recognition. Survival depended entirely on submission to coordination. And above the Philippine Sea, as vapor trails faded into morning light, Harper remained alive not because he saw an enemy, but because someone else saw for him. The Japanese pilots did not understand where the weakness had formed. They knew their aircraft remained fast. They knew their engines still climbed with efficiency. They knew their wings still cut cleanly through air currents that resisted heavier American designs. They had not grown careless. Their discipline persisted. Their formations remained tight. Their devotion undiminished. They simply began to die without explanation. Reports filtered back from surviving aviators who spoke of unseen forces, of American fighters appearing without warning, of engagements ending before exchange could occur. They described enemies that seemed to emerge from open sky, appearing already in optimal attack position, firing before acknowledgement. Their commanders studied maps and diagrams. They reviewed flight logs and mission descriptions. None of it clarified the transformation. They searched for improved armaments, new engine upgrades, secret American aircraft. They found none sufficient. The difference did not reside in visible construction, it resided in voice. Japanese radio systems offered only limited connection. Their equipment functioned erratically above certain altitudes. Transmission clarity diminished rapidly as distance increased. Communication remained secondary to individual judgment. Most critically, the doctrine of silence dominated cockpit culture. Silence equaled discipline. Silence equaled professionalism. Silence meant trust in eyes. This belief, once foundational, now endangered them. Without guidance, each pilot flew enclosed within his own understanding of the sky. He saw only what lay ahead of his canopy, interpreted cloud patterns, measured position relative to formation. His awareness did not extend beyond range of immediate sight. Harper, meanwhile, listened. The difference was neither bravery nor intelligence. It was architecture. As he followed another prescribed vector, his aircraft smoothly rotated, responding to the soft hum of transmission. He imagined what the enemy saw. Probably nothing. Only vast open sky, unmarred, peaceful, deceptive. A false calm preceding sudden collapse. He understood that their final realization often occurred only at the moment of impact. A flash, a tremor, smoke, descent. There was no contest. He had almost ceased counting destroyed aircraft. The act felt clinical. Purpose replaced impulse. Risk minimized through preparation. The voice guided with unwavering certainty. Continue climb, maintain course. Secondary formation approaching. Harper adjusted altitude accordingly, climbing through thinning air. Temperature dropped imperceptibly. The oxygen feed remained steady. In the distance, faint silhouettes soon emerged. They flew with dignity, organized precision, unaware their path intersected with unseen calculation. They had not learned the geometry that now governed their environment. Their arrogance lay not in pride but in tradition. It was tradition that guided their training. It was tradition that limited improvement. It was tradition that prevented adoption of external control systems that threatened autonomy. Where America embraced coordination, Japan upheld individuality. Where America transmitted voice, Japan preserved silence. One doctrine accommodated transformation, the other resisted it. Within moments, Harper's guns synchronized with bearing adjustments. The pattern repeated precisely as before. Instruction preceded action. Flight aligned with solution. Elimination occurred without ceremony. This was not cruelty. It was inevitability. Below, the Pacific waters accepted falling debris with equal neutrality. Waves expanded outward, then closed again. The surface returned to stillness as if nothing had occurred. And yet, above it, the calculus of war advanced steadily. Back along distant decks, radar technicians noted each engagement. Operators assigned symbols to points of light before erasing them upon resolution. No one saw the insurgent individual acts. They recorded spatial outcomes. Events converted into data. Data converted into conclusion. It did not matter who fired. It mattered that trajectory intersected target. Harper found no satisfaction in this method. He experienced no apprehension either. He understood the purpose. His mind settled into compliance. As the engagement zone cleared once more, he returned to alignment position. Other Hellcats reformed around him, each under guidance. The sky appeared peaceful again. It had not changed physically. It had changed structurally. The enemy flew blind. The American formation navigated by unseen instructions that never faltered. Minutes passed. Then more adjustments. Reorientation required. Bearing 180. He complied. The ocean below held quiet indifference. Clouds drifted slowly across open canopy arcs. The air tasted metallic through mask intake. Static whispered periodically. His world consisted of controls and commands. He knew the Japanese pilots still believed in the purity of singular skill, in the perfection of close engagement, in honor achieved through confrontation. He did not fault them for this belief. It had once ruled the sky effectively. But the sky had changed. It no longer rewarded bravery alone, it rewarded those who perceived ahead. As the mission neared completion, Harper awaited fresh directive in almost complete silence. The formation remained stable. No visible intrusion disturbed the horizon. The calm felt deliberate, like the pause before something inevitable. The voice returned. Return vector. Confirmed. Stand down. He followed instructions, turning gently toward coordinate path for recovery sequence. The Hellcat descended in measured slope, aligning with distant silhouette of carrier deck. Even landing had become process, regulated by signals and transmitted pacing. Everything functioned within design. As his tires touched metal surface and the aircraft rolled under guidance, Harper extracted his headset slowly. His ears felt unfamiliar without static. Around him, crew members moved with routine efficiency. None asked about what he had seen. None required description, because they already knew. The operators had tracked every moment. The system had documented outcome. He removed helmet and stepped onto the deck, greeted by salted wind and muted sunlight. The noise of machinery replaced air silence. Still, he felt the echo of instructions pulsing faintly behind his hearing. He realized something unsettling. If the voice ceased, if the signal fragmented, if the system failed, the world he now navigated would collapse suddenly into visual chaos. He wondered how many pilots would know how to revert. He suspected very few. The system had not simply altered warfare. It had redefined pilot identity. They no longer led engagement. They executed solutions. And the enemy, unaware of this transformation, continued flying into a realm governed by unseen mathematics and distant voices. The Zero had not lost capability. It had lost relevance. The pilot had not lost skill. He had lost context. Combat had ceased being duel. It had become calculation. And as Harper walked across the deck beneath shifting clouds, the voice faded into memory. He knew that somewhere above the horizon, somewhere within invisible corridors of communication, the next engagement had already been planned. The sky no longer belonged to the one who saw it first. It belonged to those who saw it before it existed. The carrier's deck pulsed with life beneath Harper's boots, a contained city of controlled urgency and repetition. Aircraft moved in, practiced intervals. Deck crews signaled with deliberate motion. The Hellcat was guided into position without ceremony, its engine winding down into metallic quiet. The sky above remained unchanged, yet its meaning had altered irrevocably. Harper removed his gloves and flexed his fingers, feeling circulation return. Around him, no one spoke of victory. No one described the engagement. There was no need. The combat had already been converted into reports, plotted into diagrams, reduced to coordinates and vectors. The language of modern war did not concern itself with narrative. It concerned itself with outcome. Inside command compartments, Officers reviewed tracked returns and engagement timings. They adjusted parameters. They recalculated intercept envelopes. They verified radar calibration stability. The system did not rest. It prepared for the next convergence. Harper walked toward the interior access hatch, the faint scent of aviation fuel still lingering around him. He passed other pilots who bore identical expressions, neutral, focused, untroubled. Their silence was not absence, it was function. He entered a narrow corridor where light flickered faintly against metal walls. Somewhere nearby, radio chatter filtered softly through partially open doors. He paused briefly, listening. It was not casual conversation. It was structured notation, bearings, frequencies, predictive markers. This was the true battlefield. He realized that the victory he had participated in did not belong to him. It did not carry individual authorship. It belonged to a collective framework whose components would remain unseen to history. The man who guided his flight would remain unknown. The technician who calibrated the frequency would remain uncredited. The engineer who designed signal stability would remain anonymous. And yet, they had preserved his life as surely as any armor plating. Japan could never imitate this structure because they misunderstood its essence. They believed success emerged from excellence in isolation, from perfection of the single warrior. Their manufacturing efforts focused on aircraft frames, engine output, weight distribution. They recovered downed American machines and documented each bolt and dimension. None of it explained why Americans always arrived ready. They copied what they could see. They failed to copy what saw for them. The Japanese cockpit remained silent by doctrine. Officers discouraged excessive radio transmission, viewing it as unnecessary distraction. Communication was reserved for critical conditions only. Each pilot was entrusted with his own tactical awareness. That awareness now proved insufficient. Harper contemplated this disparity without judgment. He harbored no animosity toward his opponents. He recognized bravery in their persistence. He acknowledged the skill required to maneuver such agile machines. He viewed them not as inadequately trained, but as improperly equipped for transformation they never prepared to acknowledge. It was not their failure. It was their environment that betrayed them. He reached a small partition near maintenance staging and observed as mechanics inspected his aircraft. They traced minor markings along the wing, tested hydraulic lines, adjusted ammunition feeds. The Hellcat awaited next deployment with patient stillness. The voice would return. The unseen guidance would again instruct him toward calculated engagement. And somewhere ahead, Japanese pilots would launch once more with unwavering commitment to traditions that no longer defined the structure of war. Far off in operational planning rooms, analysts examined intercepted enemy transmissions. They documented confusion, frustration, disbelief. Messages spoke of impossible timing and invisible attackers. No reference to radio dominance surfaced. They had not recognized what controlled the sky. The silence in their cockpit remained, misunderstood. Harper knew the truth not because he understood theory, but because he lived within its effect. Over the course of his career, countless missions would unfold with identical precision. Each sortie reduced risk proportionally. Each engagement shifted power away from personal instinct toward integrated command. This invisible advantage reshaped not only tactical outcomes but strategic projection across the Pacific theater. American dominance no longer depended on proximity. It depended on anticipation. The battle space expanded beyond human perception. Control emanated from structured knowledge. The enemy continued to fly, guided by memory. America flew guided by mathematics. In subtle moments between deployments, Harper reflected on a single, uncomfortable truth. Without the system, his own flight ability alone offered little protection. No amount of personal skill could circumvent coordinated defeat. No amount of courage could counter vector positioning controlled from outside his vision. He understood that the modern pilot had surrendered autonomy for survival. He did not view this as weakness. He viewed it as adaptation. As dusk settled over the carrier, shadow sliding along deck surfaces, Harper leaned briefly against the railing and observed horizon lines darken. The sea mirrored fading light. Above, contrails dissolved into night's emptiness. Somewhere beyond visibility, radar arrays continued scanning. The voice would not sleep. The sky had become charted geometry. And in that geometry, the old world of individual valor faded steadily. What remained was efficiency, calculation, predictive dominance. He wondered whether the future would remember men like him or the systems they obeyed. He wondered whether stories of unseen voices and precise interception would ever overshadow legends of close combat and heroic defiance. He suspected the latter would endure longer in memory. But memory no longer mattered. Survival did. As the call for next readiness approached, Harper adjusted his headset once more, listening to the faint static that preceded transmission. He knew it would soon speak again, and when it did, he would respond without hesitation. Because the battle no longer began when enemy aircraft appeared in sight. It began when the system spoke. The modern air war had no face, only a voice.